Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
In the military, veterans answer the call to serve. Now it's our turn. At Hire Heroes USA, they're changing lives, helping veterans and military spouses secure meaningful careers, all at no cost.
With over 100,000 success stories and counting nationwide, they're connecting skilled veterans with employers who recognize their true value. Visit hireheroesusa.org to access their services or to support their mission.
Real people making bold moves. Unforgettable journeys into life's next chapter. This is the Second Act Podcast.
Every day is a new chance. Mindset on a new path. Anything is possible. Any limit I surpass. Everything is in my grasp. I got tunnel vision with a pickaxe. Life is more fun when you live like there's no strings attached.
Hey, John.
What is going on, Michael? How you doing, man?
I am doing phenomenally well today. I'm going to use your word and pair it with mine. Yeah, I'm just, today's a good day on so many fronts, but I'm excited for our guest today.
Yeah.
I think when we introduce him, everyone's going to realize why we have our guest on today. And I don't want to hold things up too much, but tell me a little bit about how your day and week's going.
Oh, man. I'll tell you two cool things. One is this weekend I took time, instead of using my normal drip coffee pot, I made French press. And let me tell you, I know there's coffee aficionados out there, coffee snobs, there's people that don't care. When you take the time to make French press, it just makes the cup of coffee that much better. And I really appreciated it. I got to spend time with my boys, my wife. We sat around the table and I had 2 cups of French press. And I was like, man, this is what living is about. So that was one cool thing. And then I'm not trying to open up a can of discussion over coffee making techniques. But then the second thing is I heard a discussion about seeds and about how you can take a seed and not plant it for thousands of years. Like they found a seed in King Pharaoh, one of the Pharaoh's tombs, right? And they planted it and it still grew to this day. It sprouted and grew. And so they're talking about seeds, right? Seeds of hope, seeds of desire, things that you want to do in the future. And they can sit dormant for a while. But once you decide to put action into those seeds, plant them, water them, cultivate them, they end up producing. So it's kind of a play on, hey, don't give up. You have those seeds, you have those dreams. They can still come true. All you got to do is put a little work into it. They're not dead. So anyway,
I love that.
Coffee to seeds to
coffee to seeds, and you're
speaker.
planting the seed for our intro here. This is perfect.
Not intended at all.
Yeah. Even better. I love that it's not intended, but I know our second act audience is going to thoroughly enjoy this conversation. So do you want me to introduce our guest today?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Today, we are excited to welcome Henry Oliver, author of the newly released Second Act, What Late Bloomers Can Tell You About Reinventing Your Life. Henry is a writer, speaker, and creator of the Common Reader, a widely acclaimed Substack newsletter that inspires readers to embrace curiosity and make the most of their reading time. His work blends insightful essays on literature, history, and talent with engaging discussions on topics like late bloomers, failure, and the cultural impact of Netflix. Featured in New Statesman, The Critic, Unheard, and recently highlighted in The Atlantic, Henry's writings bridges timeless ideas with modern insights, drawing on over a decade in talent attraction marketing. He's also a dynamic speaker, connecting deeply with audiences to explore the transformative potential of reinvention. Please join me in welcoming Henry to the show.
Hey, welcome, Henry.
Thank you so much. What a thrilling introduction.
Yeah.
We did our best to pump you up with that, Henry. And it's funny. I was telling John, a friend of mine who lives in Minneapolis sent me a Wall Street Journal article that was written about the release of your book. And that's what prompted me to reach out to you, just because of some of the things that John and I are doing with the podcast, because I think there's going to be a lot to talk about, both in what we've explored and what we've discovered through our community and what you've deeply researched and written about in your book. It's a wonderful topic, and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Great. Well, I'm excited for the conversation.
And he's coming to us from across the pond.
That is true.
Yes.
Southeast London.
Our reach internationally expanding. So Henry, let me ask, is the second act, What Late Bloomers Can Tell You About Reinventing Your Life, is that your first book, or where is that in the litany of your writing?
It is my
talents?
first book.
Congratulations.
I had done writing before that, about writing online, writing for magazines and so forth, but it's my first book. Yeah.
And is this something that you had been wanting to write for a while? Is this a topic that just kind of came to you? Is this something that's come from history? Tell some of our listeners about how you came upon.
It came to me all at once. One day I was listening to a podcast and I heard the economist Tyler Cowen say that he was writing a book about talented people, and one subject that covers is people who haven't done anything yet, but maybe they will. And I thought, oh, why? No, I know loads about that. And I suddenly am having all these ideas, and and you're like, wow, what a weird, that's so weird. Why do I know all this stuff? So in a way, it arrived very slowly and then very quickly, right? And I look back and realized that a lot of what I'd been interested in professionally and personally was all under that umbrella idea.
Tell me more about that day. I want to know sort of what led up
I
to
don't
that.
remember anything else about
Other than that moment, the day is blurry.
Yeah, I don't remember. I had a long period of illness, and I'd been away from work for 4 months. So I had recently been doing a lot of reading, focused reading, and I was just getting back into work around that time. And so a lot of issues were coming together from the two sides of my life. Anyone who's taken time away from work knows that weird feeling of going back, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, this is much more familiar to women who go on maternity leave. We're 3 men, and we're like, oh, does this ever happen? And half the world's going, yes, it happens to us all the time. But it's, you go back to somewhere that you're very, very familiar with. And in Phillips Larkin's words, you see it all again in different terms. So I was like, all these things that I thought I was so familiar with, I was seeing afresh. And when I heard that phrase, I was doing the washing up or something. I was like, how weird that I would know so much about a seemingly random topic.
Now, you said you notice people who haven't done anything. Expand on that a little bit, because I think there's a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? That's not fully encapsulating people that just haven't done anything with their life, right? It's people that have put something aside or have chased a different dream. What does that mean?
We're not talking about Bartleby the Scrivener. No, we're not talking about people who literally sit there and say, I will do nothing. What we're talking about are people whose accomplishments are not yet huge, not yet impressive, maybe, or are simply not yet what they're going to become. So you're looking at someone and you think they're at a particular level, if you like. And what happens is, actually, they did have way more potential than that in some way. A very American example is Eisenhower, who was not promoted for 16 years because he was a young soldier at the end of the First World War. And
Yes.
so he's basically spending his career in a period of downsizing. The military is cutting itself back. People are leaving. And so you can look at Eisenhower, 15, 16, 17 years into his career, when he's middle-aged and whatever, and say, well, he hasn't done anything hugely impressive, right? Everyone knows, like, the people who know him are like, oh, this is a great guy or whatever. But just to anyone who doesn't know him in detail, you have this weird sensation that he's just some guy in the army. But clearly, he is, as you were talking about with seeds, clearly he is sitting on this huge potential. Now, the reality of what's going on, as you hinted at, is that he is doing a lot of things that are preparing him for achievements later on, right? But we very often measure people's ability or their potential through their outward achievements, through their external accomplishments. It's much, much harder to look at Eisenhower at that time and say, but he's doing all this reading and he's thinking about all these topics and he's talking to these people, because this is all kind of semi-private stuff. It's, it's difficult to get into the inner mind of the person. And so that's really what we're talking about when someone, it looks like they come out of the blue when they're successful. And you have to go back and say, well, it wasn't really out of the blue. It's just that it looked like that to us.
It's so interesting that there's a couple of things to unpack here, Henry. One is in your own personal example that you shared, coming back to life, if you will, and finding some purpose in writing this book, and having that change in perspective on all the things that sort of led you up to that point to then become a writer and publish this incredible work. But then the other thing that you just touched on, I think if I read your book and understand it correctly, is in that example of Eisenhower, all of those little things were feeding into his explorer mindset that then transitioned into him becoming an explorer, an exploiter, and doing the great things he did that we all know him for.
That's right. And this is a really interesting question, because a lot of people want me to tell them that, it's not a question of like the long, hard slog and always being ambitious from a young age and stuff. Some people, realize what they are later on. Now, that is true, and there are people like that. But I found a lot of these people who are more like Eisenhower, who they're doing the work. These quiet years, as you say, he's putting in the time. He's getting mentors. He's studying strategy. He's learning, how does the army work as a bureaucratic organization? How can I get good at, getting the army to deliver things that it needs to deliver? And how can I interact with people properly so that I can be an efficient officer? One of his mentors is like a negative mentor or like an inverse mentor. So some of these generals he works with, he's like, I want to be like these people. I want to emulate them. One of them, he's like, this is everything you shouldn't do. And this is like, anyone who's had a boss like that, that's a really good thing to learn, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think maybe it's a very important step in particular types of success. So yeah, there is very often this thing. And some people say to me like, oh, but there are people like Proust. Proust is like, he goes to the salon and he eats cake and he gossips and he's not working hard and he's not doing right. It just comes to him later. And this is clearly rubbish. I mean, Proust is a fiendish observer of human nature. There is no such thing as merely gossiping with Proust. All gossip is the higher art for him, right? So the work takes different forms. The sort of unspoken lesson of the book is that there's no like watch Netflix every night for 15 years and then wake up and discover that you're Toni Morrison thing. Like that
Right.
doesn't happen. And no, I mean, I never thought it would, but just to clarify, like that's not an option here.
I would say that in those examples, it's critically important for anyone at any age to sort of travel through life with an open mind and be open to the things that come into and out of your life, because you don't know where they're going to take you. I truly believe, to the depths of my soul now, and I didn't realize, actually, I'm a late bloomer in this respect. I didn't realize this until later in my life, that life is actually more fun when you live it as an experiment. And some of the attributes that you describe in your book about the journey, about having a long, windy, unplanned career path, and some are a little bit more mapped out than others, but they do take detours, and sometimes those detours are permanent. And then the element of luck, being in the right place with the right people at the right time, those two conditions really make for some interesting outcomes. I think, John, you were going to comment on something as well.
Well, listening to you, Henry, I'm curious as to how much of this book encapsulates your story and where you are coming from, or is this purely written outside of your own experience?
I don't think there's anything about me in the book, either
Okay.
explicitly or implicitly. But I spend most of my time thinking about writers and their work. And I do think that there's no such thing as a book that isn't reflective of its author in a fundamental way. We are very used right now and for the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years of talking about authors of fiction and nonfiction as like putting themselves into the book. And we like to see the author in the book, right? And we do this with people like Sally Rooney, but we also do it with like that Sapiens book that everyone seems to have read. This, I think, is a very dull and simplified model of how it works. The book is the product of your personality, and your personality is only somewhat within your control, and even really only somewhat within your understanding, right? Like all the way back in Western thought, whether you truly understand your personality is one of the hallmarks of wisdom. It's very few of us actually get to that point, right? And I'm going to go off on a big rant if I'm not careful, but because we psychologize everything in modern culture, I think we have very limited understanding of what personality really is. And so we try and find these psychological markers of the author in their works. Whereas really what's going on, maybe a better word is temperament. The author's temperament is what creates the book, which sounds a bit close to like everything is vibes, man. But hopefully you can see some kind of difference between the two.
In the creation of this work, did you know when it was done, and were you happy when it was done and that was the outcome you wanted? Or did you have more ambitious goals with the creation of this book? And I guess what I'm asking is, did you make it for you and you hope that other people like it, or did you make it for other people?
No, I did the first one. I made significant changes to what I thought, to my concept of the book and the structure of it based on good advice from like a large number of people. But I ultimately decided that I would write it in a way that was not like maxing commerciality or maxing sales or readership or whatever.
Yeah.
Because
The commercialization. Yeah.
well, I'm I think commercialize. I don't want people to think like I'm saying commercialization. Like commercialization is great. It's just that what I thought would be the best answer to the question was not necessarily compatible with the genre that would be the best selling type of this book. So you can imagine a version of this book where the biographical chapters are basically not there. And the core of the book is those 4 or 5 social science chapters, slightly slimmed down and told in a more anecdotal way that then weaves in all the evidence that's there, right? To give you this grand unifying theory, and you just have to do these 5 things, and woo, you're a late bloomer. And we have loads of those books, and I read them and I think they're great. And I'm not trying to be like, yo, Malcolm Gladwell's actually not clever. Like, I think that's bullshit. He is clever and he writes really good books. But what I wanted was to give a very different sort of answer to the question. And so that necessitated a different structure of the book. So I wrote it for myself, and, I only regret that in a financial sense, not in any other sense.
Well, you don't know if you regret it from a financial sense.
No,
yet,
that was a
because
joke. That was a joke. I don't
Yeah,
regret
okay.
anything. Yeah, I don't regret anything.
Because it may go on to be one of the top selling books in the world. I mean, obviously, John and I are passionate about the subject, and we love the community that's been built around those who are pursuing something new in life, and maybe have a change in perspective over their course of their life as to what's important and what's not important. I know I certainly have, because from childhood, we talk about this quite often. Success is thought of as one thing, and it's normally a financial metric or some sort of fame and prestige, which is great. That makes for good books and articles and other things that people can aspire to. But for a lot of people, success is just being able to spend quality time with their family and friends and enjoying making a nice cup of coffee, and not having to worry about paying some of the bills. So it's really interesting, the dichotomy in some ways, and then the similarities in other ways about these various journeys.
One of the things I was very dedicated to was the use of biography, because if you think about all the significant movements in the world, be they like the transmission of Greek culture as one of the great inheritances of the West, the spread of Christianity, the importance of the Reformation to the development of England, the abolition movement. These like really, really major things that have had like hundreds of years worth of lasting effect on the culture and on institutions. All of these things are achieved through biographical means. Okay, what we talk about when we talk about the Greeks are the lives of Greek heroes and the lives of tragic characters. When we talk about Christianity, I mean the Gospels are biographies in structure, in content, in form, and intention. Right? Let me tell you the story of this man, Jesus. This is the biographical temperament. The Reformation was popularized partly through, what we would characterize as a culture war, with Luther saying that like the Pope was the devil's arse or whatever. But one of the most significant things in England was Fox's Book of Martyrs, and there were two books in every church in English: the Bible and the Book of Martyrs. And so everyone could go to the church and read the lives of the people who had created the Protestant religion. If you think about the abolition movement, there was a movement before Wilberforce, which did not succeed because the guy running it was like a prickly character. He was a bit of a prickly pear. And obviously, if you want to make these kind of changes in the world, you need to be charming, you need to be politic, you need to be able to like get people in a movement, right? What is it that like really caught the imagination? That's the English abolition movement. What is it that caught the American imagination? It was the narrative of Frederick Douglass and other such stories, right? It was Uncle Tom's Cabin. I mean, the narrative of Frederick Douglass might be one of the most important books in the Western canon. So I don't want to like say, like, and then there was my book, because these are all very significant, right? But I'm very, 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 as you can tell, like I'm very enthusiastic about the idea that what people really learn from is the stories of other people's lives.
Yes.
And that's why even in the most social sciencey nonfiction, it's the obligation. You've got to start with an anecdote, and you've got to say, there's this guy, and he's got like light brown hair, and he's kind of cheerful, and they make, because what they have to do is make you feel a bit like you're reading a biography or a novel in order to absorb the social science stuff. And I said, well, why don't we just do the full story? This is the story of late bloomers. Let's just do that. But we no longer live in an age where biographical writing is central to the culture in that way. But I think for the people for whom this book is useful, that is the way it will be most useful.
So, Henry, is second act, is this a movement that people are awakening to, or is this just a new term that we're putting on an old action?
I obviously think it's an old thing, and what I've tried to say in the book is that these people are real. This is just a type of person. This just they're just with us, and we haven't quite seen them in the right way. But I think you're right that there's a new movement in the sense that people are living longer and healthier lives. Retirements, right? Everyone will have had this experience. You look at your parents versus your grandparents, and you're like, what happened? In one generation, people just aren't old anymore.
Yeah.
And then they travel and they do all this stuff. And like it was a couple of years ago, Best Actress at the Oscars and Best Supporting Actress, both going to women in their 60s. There are so many more people in popular culture now who are, quote unquote, retirement age. Labor force participation among the over 65s is way up. So I do think that as the boomers are moving through, we don't need to debate it. It's just happening. And so I'm trying to catch that cultural wave, if you like, and say, well, let's draw these lessons out more broadly across the culture, right?
What's kind of interesting, as you were describing the biographical approach, Henry, was I don't know how much research you've done on late bloomers versus maybe early childhood folks who were predisposed to being famous and influential, or if there's even a way to measure which cohort has been more influential on Earth. But I think it would be interesting to explore if that was something that could be explored.
My instincts are that the young will have had more influence in the sense that they're more likely to be radicals, right? They're more likely to push for the revolution. But I would think that if you could do some like overall calculation of history in some bizarre way, I would think it would come out pretty even in the end.
Pretty even, yeah.
You know, the founding fathers were pretty middle aged, weren't they? Many of them were not like 19-year-olds
No.
running a campus protest, right?
No, but I don't know how you'd be able to ever come up with a conclusion on it. But it's just from a thought-provoking perspective. I think it'd be interesting to look and try to compare people who want to weigh in on who they think are the most influential people ever to live, and just see attributes of those people to understand if things about them would be able to describe or be able to predict some sort of outcome. But that maybe has changed over time. Maybe centuries ago, it was sort of where you were born and what family you were born into. But in today's world, it's not so much.
I think military stuff skews it a lot because like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, these, you know, Horatio Nelson, these guys get thrown into their misdeeds at quite a young age. And they just have outsized influence on the world. But in the influence that you don't see, right? Those people who make a great deal of difference in the world that don't get the kind of name recognition that Napoleon gets, I would think that is driven much more by more by older people for sure.
Mm-hmm.
People running institutions, right? People teaching the young, people who've screwed up a few times and are going to go out and do things differently now. This is a huge and important part of what changes a society.
Looking back, Henry, is there something from your youth that you feel has led you to the point of this book release and the things that have happened in your life that have helped sort of direct you towards this?
Not hugely, but I do think my parents were late bloomers.
Okay.
Which has to be significant, right? And I had a grandfather that I never met because he died quite young. And I was always told about him. And I think he would have been, he wanted to be a late bloomer for sure. I don't, who knows what would have happened, right? Because he died, I think, in his early 50s. So maybe there's some kind of shaping influence in that family setup. I don't know.
Well, I'm interested, you know, as you asked Michael about late bloomers, and I'm thinking about failure. And my question is, can failure create a late bloomer? And do late bloomers reduce failure? Is there a correlation between those two?
There's no good answer to this in the sense that I can't give you some great little quote or some great little statistic or, right? Failure is one of the biggest, messiest, most difficult parts of human life. Sometimes failure will crush you like an insect under a wheel, and we just can't get around that.
Yep.
Sometimes failure can be really good for you. I don't know that there's a good way of devising when failure is useful and when it's not useful. I think late bloomers, if we have more late bloomers, we can turn failure to good account, and we can have a better attitude of, I'm not hugely enthusiastic about the self-helpy kind of every failure is a step on the road to success. Because for some people, every failure is a step on the road to an early grave, right? And I just think it's diminishing and a bit over happy. And I'm British, so I'm here to bring the mood down. But I do think that there should be, again, like if we're not going to psychologize everything, there should be a greater understanding that failure can be redeemed.
Yes.
Right, and that one of the purposes of aging, or one of the advantages of aging, which there are a few, is that you can look back and redeem your time and say, okay, well, I can do this again. I can do this differently. I can try something else. There was one very, very interesting study that showed that early career scientists who were pretty good at their job, but very narrowly missed out on a funding application, ended up outperforming their peers who very narrowly succeeded in getting the funding application. So there is definitely some support for the idea that a talented, accomplished, hardworking, whatever person who sort of takes a bit of a knock early on, but not like, oh, you're never going to do this. Just, oh my God, I missed that. So close.
Sure.
That maybe can actually be a very encouraging spur to higher accomplishment and leave you with a sense of, this is never going to get away from me again. right? It's a complacency killer. But, I think of Samuel Johnson, who was in his early 40s and was a hack writer. And had he died on the streets of London, which was, something that could easily have happened to him in the 18th century, we wouldn't remember him really. He wrote a few poems that would be remembered, but we wouldn't remember him really. And there was a letter from his old school teacher to a mutual friend who said, "Remember me to Sam. He is quite lost to himself and to the world." And it's sad to see this sort of formidable talent. Now, soon after that, he had a friend who was a bookseller who said, "People are looking for someone to write a dictionary, and I think you should do it." This just changed everything for Johnson. And he was accustomed to battling with his failures and with his mental health. And so he was able to take on the extraordinarily difficult battle of writing a whole dictionary. But it's instructive that his first response was, "No, I'm not going to write a whole dictionary, thanks." And his friend had to push him into it. So sometimes failure, he said, sorrow is a kind of rust of the soul. And I think failure can have that effect on people. And it's hard. It's hard to get over it.
I appreciate that answer because we have interviewed a lot of guests and it's quite the opposite. Their success leads them into their second act, right? They have achieved everything that they thought they wanted to achieve, and they realized that it wasn't exactly what they wanted in the long run. So, and then they get into their second act and they start something, and it's the failure that keeps them or makes them resilient to keep striving. So it's almost what I would imagine everything that you just talked about in reverse. And so I think it's very interesting to hear you kind of describe that difference.
Some people talk about the curse of early success, right? Because you get successful, you chase what they're saying, you're good, here's the money, and so you chase it, and then you get 10 years in and you go, this isn't as exciting as I thought, and I kind of didn't want to do it.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that can be a real problem. And like that in itself is a form of failure. The denial of failure, I think, is linked to the denial of death. I'm getting so I'm making all these big pronouncements, but we like to psychologize, and that means that we are scared of death because death is the ultimate thing saying, well, your psychology be damned. Like, you'd better just get on and do stuff rather than sit around filling in your Myers-Briggs form and twiddling your thumb. Well, the denial of failure is linked to the denial of death.
Death is a great forcing mechanism for you to get clear on perspective and purpose. And we're talking about events, whether they're success or failure, as another mechanism for clarity around your purpose and what you want to do next in life. And sometimes those events are planned. You're in sports and you train and you go through a competition and there's a final game or a playoff and there's going to be an outcome of that, and you have that experience. And others are unplanned, and sometimes it's lucky success right out of the gate. Other times it's like you got hit in the face with something you weren't expected, and now you have to pivot and deal with life in a new way. But I think it's these events that are clarifying mechanisms. And I think the first biographical example you use in your book about the woman who took over the Washington Post was one of those examples.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know about Katherine Graham before I researched the book. And Anna Gatt, who runs Intellect, which is a great online organization for having salons about interesting topics, messaged me and said, "Oh, you've got to read Katherine Graham's book if you're writing about late bloomers." So I got it out of the library and I thought, let's see how this is. Oh my goodness, what an incredible book. I mean, just put your life on hold and go and read that book right now. The woman was a natural phenomenon. And it got to the point in the 90s when Bill Clinton, I can't remember I think he'd just been elected. So you guys have that weird thing where you've won the election, but you won't be president for like 8 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
So in that period, if someone said to him, they were like, "Okay, well, the first thing you have to do is go and see Katherine Graham. Otherwise, you're a nobody in Washington." And he's like, "Sorry, I'm a nobody in Washington." Right? But like that's who she is. She's this amazing figure. Because they broke Watergate, They broke Pentagon Papers, like incredible stuff that to us, I think, is difficult to comprehend just how important those events were. It's difficult
Yeah.
for us to comprehend that the Nixon White House was calling up Katherine Graham and saying, you're trying to get approval for an IPO for your business, right? And we're going to screw you on the TV stuff. We're going to screw you on the licenses if you run that story. Now, this is a phenomenal financial decision that she's making as a CEO, as well as a decision of moral import and political import. She goes ahead. Yeah, great. Publish the damn thing, right? This is what a decision. This is one of the most significant moments. And I'm fascinated by who is she that she can do this? And it turns out she was a wreck. She'd been bullied by her mother, married to a manic depressive who treated her very badly. Obviously, the stress of being married to someone who has such significant mental health problems also weighed on her. Manic depression was not well understood. No one used those words until after he was dead. Phil Graham killed himself. So she woke up one afternoon after a nap, aged 45, 46. Her husband is shot himself dead, and she owns the whole company now. And she's been bullied, and she's had her confidence eroded. How do you go from that to being the Watergate lady? I mean, it's insane. And that's why biography is the answer to this, right? What a ridiculous story.
Yeah.
If we're all the sum of our life experiences, and to her, all of those very acute things she was dealing with gave her an incredible risk tolerance and perspective around, releasing an article in a newspaper about something ain't that bad in the scheme of things. Maybe that is the catalyst for her to make that decision.
I think a lot of what she learned was very emotional. And this is why she's often underrated, because what we want is like the shareholders letter that's full of all these clever phrases and yik-yak, Socrates quotes, whatever. Whereas she, everyone said, well, you're not going to run this thing. You should sell the company. All her friends and lawyers and whatever. She said, to hell with it. I'm not going to be the one that sells the family paper. Now, she's got that kind of inner steel. That's the personality or the temperament that gets you through Watergate. And that comes partly from what you said, but it partly comes from being very patrician. If you grow up in a house with servants and your father is this millionaire businessman and you meet all these European writers and he works at the Federal Reserve, he's the head of the Federal Reserve and whatever, these things weigh on you very heavily. But for sure, she built up a kind of resilience. She must have realized that, she'd reached the low point and she'd survived it. And I think she makes a very interesting, I don't want to go too hard on her husband because the poor man was desperately ill and killed himself. But she makes a very interesting contrast of personalities. And I think she was a much steadier person and made very sound decisions that possibly he would not have made. So it's to me, it all came through that side of things rather than through anything sort of that we can intellectualize, even though clearly she is a highly, highly intelligent person.
Well, I was going to say, I love when we look at the various guests we've had. We've got young guests who are filled with excitement and enthusiasm and energy, who are out there wanting to make huge impacts. And we've got older guests who are patient and have learned a lot of lessons, who are really matching those life lessons with the new experiences they're facing. And, just what you were saying, Henry, is, this lady was filled with life experiences that then shaped her essentially the way she handled the paper. And I just love to hear different guests and the experiences that they're coming from, whether it's youth and vigor and energy or, old gray hair, hard work and some failure. And they're both going about their problem based on what they have gone through. And, results may vary, but, it's shaping the people around them and what they're kind of able to see and able to define how they're going to pursue their lives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think these different perspectives are very important. The novelist Margaret Atwood tells a wonderful story about how when she was a young college lecturer, she taught the novel Middlemarch by George Eliot. And in the morning, she taught it to like 19-year-old undergraduates. And in the evening, she taught it at the Adult Education Center in the university. So they're all like older, right? And she said in the morning, the kids would all say, "We don't like this novel. These people, they make bad decisions. They screw their lives up. They marry the wrong people. Oh, this is terrible. This is ridiculous. But what kind of people are these?" And in the evening session, all the like 50-year-olds are going, "Oh my God, I love this novel. These people screw their lives up. They marry the wrong people. They make all these terrible
Yes.
decisions. This is exactly how life
Yes.
is." And I think it's true. I think
Yes.
it's really important to see it from these different perspectives, because sometimes someone can look at something and have a bad reaction to it, but someone else can help you see like, no, 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 no. There's a lot of value in this, right?
Yes.
That's actually, this is very useful, very interesting, which is exactly the essence of Katherine Graham. A lot of people did not see actually what potential she was carrying.
So, Henry, we're getting close to the end here, John, and I wanted to bring up our question that we ask with all our guests, which, since we both are passionate about the second act and helping individuals see things from other perspectives, and I think in your book, Henry, you said expand what you pay attention to. A very important statement. John and I always like to ask if you had some practical advice or insights that you wanted to leave our audience with in writing this book and having this discussion with us, what would that be?
I'm just going to fire off a bullet point list of stuff. Sometimes what you want isn't success, and you should stop worrying about success and just do what it is that you want. Sometimes what you want to do won't make you happy, but you should do it anyway. Sample more. If you don't know where you're going, or you don't know what you're doing, you should do more sampling. People are very happy to take a sample of some random cheese in the supermarket, but when it comes to their life, they won't sample a single damn thing. This is crazy.
Wow.
All accomplishments are achieved at the margin. Everything great that ever happens is an accumulation. Okay, you have to do something useful every day. A torrent is made of drips. Use your network. Your network is, I never understood this when I was young. I was crazy. Your network is your most important thing. But there's no like hack. There's no trick. There's no system. Okay. One of the things I show in the book is it's really hard to know who the most influential people in your network are. So just everyone you meet, you just tell them what you're doing. Okay. If you decline to participate, the world will decline to pay attention. That is not your hard luck. That is not unfair. There is no injustice in this. Okay. That's on you. If you don't want to do something exciting or successful or cool, great. Get over it and live your life. No one's asking you to be that person. You can read War and Peace and you're a late bloomer because you never read War and Peace. What an amazing thing to do with your life. Great. You don't have to go out and become a world champion, something or the other. You can play Schubert on the piano. Phenomenal. There you
Incredible.
go. Rant over.
It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, that was good. That was so good.
That was really good.
We just have a few more minutes, and I want to ask Henry about this idea, the cultural impact of Netflix, because that was in your bio. I wanted to get to it real quick. If you can sum it up, 2 minutes.
Everyone thinks that Netflix is a great art form, right? The HBO phenomenon, The Sopranos, The West Wing, all this stuff. When I say this, intelligent people who I respect and who are like similar to me in some ways, they'll write to me and be like, "You're so wrong. I don't know why you're saying this." But we have this culture where like The West Wing is this wonderful thing, The Sopranos, Succession, The Atlantic compared Succession to King Lear. This is bullshit. Okay? There's nothing wrong with watching that stuff. There's nothing wrong with having fun, but there is something wrong with deceiving yourself into thinking that these are the equivalent of Tolstoy and Shakespeare. And if you want the good stuff, it's right there. It's no secret as to what the good stuff is. To be clear, I watch this stuff and it is good at what it is. It is good at what it is.
Sure.
It's just there are very clever, well-educated people in positions, significant positions, who have not read Shakespeare, but who have seen Succession twice. And this should upset more people.
I love it. With that cultural dissection, Henry, we want to thank you so much for coming on our show today and sharing your perspective and sharing more about your incredible book, Second Act. Everybody should pick it up. It's available in audio form as well if you're a road warrior and need something to listen to. For anybody who's interested in learning more about you and your writing, what is the best place for them to do that?
The Common Reader, it's on Substack. That's where I do everything. You can keep up there with everything I do. That's the one place.
Okay. We will make sure to include a link to that in our show
That's great.
notes. And Henry, thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. And congratulations
having
on
me.
your book release.
Thank you. Well, I love talking to you guys. These
Yeah.
were great questions. I got to have a rant. It was fun.
Awesome. Likewise. And I guess, John, with that said, we will talk to our audience again next week.
Yeah. I look forward to it, Michael. This is such a great conversation with Henry. And man, I learned so much again and look forward to doing it again next week.
All right. With that said, see ya.
See ya.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballinger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act Movement on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.